Case 1. The Magnetic Pole Sprint. Earth's magnetic North Pole is racing across the Arctic at unprecedented speeds, abandoning its traditional home in northern Canada and sprinting toward Siberia at rates that have shattered every scientific prediction. What began as a gentle drift has accelerated into a full-scale magnetic migration that's forcing emergency rewrites of navigation systems worldwide and challenging our fundamental understanding of planetary magnetism. For over 4 centuries, scientists have tracked the magnetic poles leisurely wandering across the Canadian Arctic, moving at a predictable pace of roughly 6 miles per year. This steady drift allowed researchers to map magnetic field changes decades in advance and maintain accurate navigation systems that guide everything from smartphone compasses to intercontinental aircraft. But something changed dramatically around the year 2000, and the pole began accelerating at rates that defied every established geomagnetic model. The acceleration started gradually, with the pole's movement increasing to about 25 miles per year by 2001. Scientists initially attributed this to normal fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field, expecting the sprint to slow down as magnetic forces reached equilibrium. Instead, the pole continued gaining speed, reaching 40 miles per year by 2019 and showing no signs of deceleration. This represents a 7-fold increase in velocity over 2 decades, a change so rapid that it's forcing the world magnetic model to be updated years ahead of schedule. The world magnetic model serves as the foundation for all magnetic navigation systems, from military submarines to civilian GPS devices. Updated every 5 years to account for gradual magnetic changes, this model suddenly became obsolete as the pole's sprint outpaced all predictions. Emergency updates were required in 2019, marking the first time in the model's history that such drastic revisions were necessary outside the normal update cycle. Navigation systems that relied on outdated magnetic coordinates began showing errors of several miles, creating potential hazards for aircraft flying polar routes and ships navigating Arctic waters. What makes this magnetic sprint truly mysterious is that it violates fundamental principles of planetary magnetism. Earth's magnetic field originates from the movement of molten iron in the planet's outer core, located nearly 2,000 miles beneath the surface. These liquid metal currents generate electromagnetic forces through a process called the geodynamo, which should produce gradual, predictable changes over geological timescales. The sudden acceleration of the magnetic pole suggests that something dramatic is happening deep within Earth's core. But seismic monitoring detects no unusual activity at those depths. The magnetic pole's movement coincides with other unexplained phenomena that amplify the mystery. Radiation monitoring stations across the Arctic have detected gaps in Earth's protective magnetic field, creating windows where harmful cosmic radiation can penetrate directly to the surface. These gaps appear and disappear without warning, lasting anywhere from hours to days and exposing northern regions to radiation levels typically blocked by magnetic shielding. The gaps seem to follow the pole's movement, suggesting a connection between the magnetic sprint and the deterioration of protective magnetic barriers. Wildlife across the Arctic has begun exhibiting disorientation behaviors that researchers link to magnetic field disruption. Migratory birds that rely on magnetic navigation have been found thousands of miles off course, abandoning traditional flyways that their species have followed for millennia. Arctic foxes and caribou show similar navigation confusion, with some populations becoming completely lost during seasonal migrations. Marine mammals like whales and seals display unusual beaching behaviors in regions where the magnetic field is most disrupted, suggesting that magnetic navigation systems evolved over millions of years are failing due to rapid field changes. Perhaps most concerning are the unexplained magnetic pulses emanating from deep within Earth's core. Magnetic observatories worldwide have recorded sudden, powerful surges in magnetic intensity that appear to originate from the core mantle boundary. These pulses last only seconds, but generate magnetic forces equivalent to major geomagnetic storms, yet they occur without any solar activity or external magnetic disturbance. The pulses seem to correlate with the pole's acceleration phases, suggesting that whatever force is driving the magnetic sprint is also generating these mysterious, core-level magnetic explosions. Case 2. The magnetic field flip-flop. Scattered across the planet, localized regions are experiencing complete magnetic polarity reversals that happen in days, rather than the thousands of years required by planetary magnetic theory. These rapid flip-flops create magnetic chaos zones where compasses spin wildly, satellite communications fail, and the fundamental laws governing Earth's magnetic field appear to break down entirely. Magnetic pole reversals represent one of the most dramatic events in planetary history, marking periods when Earth's magnetic north and south poles completely switch positions. The geological record shows these reversals have occurred throughout Earth's history, but always over timescales measured in millennia. The reversal process involves the gradual weakening of the magnetic field, a period of magnetic chaos with multiple poles, and then the slow strengthening of the field in the opposite polarity. This process typically takes between 1,000 and 10,000 years to complete, allowing life on Earth to adapt gradually to changing magnetic conditions. The rapid reversals now occurring in localized hotspots shatter this understanding completely. Magnetic monitoring stations in these zones record complete polarity flips within days or even hours, with magnetic north becoming magnetic south and vice versa. The reversals happen so quickly that automated systems can't compensate, leading to navigation failures and communication blackouts that affect everything from aircraft guidance systems to cellular networks. One of the most documented flip-flop zones spans approximately 50 square miles in northern Alaska, where magnetic reversals occur roughly every 3 months with clockwork precision. Research teams equipped with high-precision magnetometers have witnessed these events in real time, watching magnetic field lines twist and reorganize in patterns that appear almost geometric rather than natural. The reversals create temporary magnetic anomalies where compass readings vary by as much as 180 degrees within a few hundred yards, making traditional navigation impossible. These flip-flop events generate electromagnetic interference that disrupts modern technology in unprecedented ways. Satellite GPS signals become unreliable or disappear entirely within these zones, forcing aircraft to rely on visual navigation or avoid the areas completely. Radio communications experience severe distortion, with some frequencies becoming completely unusable, while others carry signals from thousands of miles away with crystal clarity. Electronic devices malfunction unpredictably, with some shutting down while others operate normally despite the magnetic chaos surrounding them. Animal behavior in flip-flop zones provides disturbing evidence of magnetic field disruption's biological effects. Migrating birds become completely disoriented when entering these areas, often flying in circles for hours before either finding their way out or collapsing from exhaustion. Sea turtles that rely on magnetic navigation for ocean-spanning migrations avoid flip-flop zones entirely, taking routes that add hundreds of miles to their journeys. Even domestic animals show stress responses when brought near these areas, with dogs refusing to enter and cats displaying agitated behaviors that persist for days after exposure. The geographic distribution of flip-flop zones follows no recognizable geological pattern, appearing in locations that span different continents, rock types, and tectonic settings. Some zones occur in geologically active regions near fault lines, while others appear in stable continental interiors, that haven't experienced geological activity for millions of years. This random distribution suggests that the phenomenon isn't connected to traditional geological processes, but may instead result from unknown electromagnetic forces operating independently of Earth's crustal structure. Case 3. The ionospheric chaos. High above Earth's surface, in the electrically charged layer of atmosphere called the ionosphere, something is generating enormous amounts of electrical energy that shouldn't exist. This invisible electromagnetic storm is producing power levels that dwarf what solar radiation can supply, creating geometric plasma formations and artificial-looking signals that suggest unknown energy sources are operating in the upper atmosphere. The ionosphere forms when solar radiation strips electrons from gas molecules in the upper atmosphere, creating a layer of charged particles that extends from about 50 to 400 miles above Earth's surface. This electrically conductive layer plays crucial roles in radio communication, GPS navigation, and protection from space radiation. Under normal conditions, the ionosphere's electrical activity directly correlates with solar output, becoming more active during periods of high solar radiation and calming during solar minimums. Current ionospheric behavior defies this fundamental relationship. Electrical activity in the upper atmosphere now exceeds what solar input can account for by factors of 10 or more, suggesting that massive amounts of energy are being generated from unknown sources. This excess energy manifests as persistent electrical discharges, plasma formations, and electromagnetic signals that operate independently of solar cycles and space weather patterns. Plasma formations in the ionosphere have begun displaying geometric patterns that appear artificial rather than natural. Satellite imagery reveals plasma structures arranged in perfect hexagons, spirals, and grid patterns that span hundreds of miles across the upper atmosphere. These formations maintain their geometric shapes for hours or days before dissolving, only to reform in similar patterns elsewhere. Natural plasma formations typically appear chaotic and irregular, following magnetic field lines and atmospheric turbulence. The geometric precision of current formations suggests some form of organizational force that isn't present in normal atmospheric physics. Radio telescopes monitoring the ionosphere detect electromagnetic signals that exhibit characteristics of artificial transmission rather than natural atmospheric noise. These signals appear at specific frequencies, maintain consistent power levels, and sometimes pulse in regular patterns that resemble digital communication protocols. The signals originate from locations in the ionosphere where no human technology exists, ruling out terrestrial sources. Their frequency characteristics don't match any known natural electromagnetic phenomena, suggesting either unknown atmospheric processes or the presence of artificial signal generators in the upper atmosphere. GPS satellites passing through regions of ionospheric chaos experience navigation errors that exceed anything in their operational history. The electrical disturbances create signal delays and distortions that render satellite positioning unreliable, affecting everything from aircraft navigation to precision agriculture systems. Some satellites report complete signal blackouts when passing through the most electrically active regions, forcing ground controllers to rely on backup systems until the spacecraft emerge from the chaos zones. The electrical energy being generated in the ionosphere appears to be increasing over time, with monitoring stations recording steady growth in electromagnetic activity since measurements began. This escalating energy output coincides with the appearance of new plasma formations and signal sources, suggesting that whatever process is driving ionospheric chaos is becoming more active and widespread. The implications are profound, as the ionosphere's electrical state directly affects global communications, navigation, and space weather protection systems that modern civilization depends upon. Case 4. The atmospheric electrical storm. Lightning strikes are erupting from clear blue skies across the planet, generating massive electrical discharges in atmospheric conditions where thunderstorms cannot possibly exist. These phantom lightning events produce energy levels equivalent to major thunderstorms while occurring in bone-dry air with zero cloud cover, zero humidity, and perfect atmospheric stability. The phenomenon violates every fundamental principle of atmospheric electricity and suggests that unknown energy sources are turning clear skies into invisible electrical battlefields. Traditional lightning requires specific atmospheric conditions that create the electrical potential necessary for massive discharges. Thunderclouds must reach sufficient height to generate temperature differentials that separate positive and negative charges. Water vapor provides the medium for charge accumulation, while atmospheric turbulence creates the friction needed to build electrical potential. Without these conditions, lightning simply cannot occur according to established atmospheric physics. Clear sky lightning events demolish this understanding completely. Monitoring stations worldwide report massive electrical discharges occurring in atmospheric conditions that measure 0% humidity, with no cloud formation for hundreds of miles in any direction. These strikes produce electromagnetic pulses identical to conventional lightning, but emerge from perfectly stable air masses that show no signs of electrical activity on any meteorological instrument. The energy levels generated by these phantom storms exceed what should be possible given atmospheric conditions. Lightning strikes require enormous electrical potential differences, typically measuring hundreds of millions of volts built up through cloud-based charge separation processes. Clear sky events produce equivalent energy output without any visible charge accumulation mechanism, suggesting that vast amounts of electrical energy are being generated through unknown atmospheric processes. Electromagnetic interference from clear sky lightning events disrupts communications and electronic systems across much wider areas than conventional thunderstorms. Radio blackouts extend for hundreds of miles from discharge locations, affecting frequencies that normally remain unaffected by atmospheric electrical activity. Aircraft flying through regions experiencing phantom lightning report complete instrument failure despite encountering no visible weather phenomena, forcing emergency landings when navigation systems shut down entirely. Weather modification attempts to understand these events have produced disturbing results. Cloud seeding operations conducted in areas experiencing clear sky lightning have triggered massive electrical responses that dwarf the original phantom discharges. The artificially introduced particles seem to interact with existing electrical fields that instruments cannot detect, creating lightning storms of unprecedented intensity that persist for hours after seeding operations conclude. Case 5. The gravity anomaly zones. Precision gravimeters stationed around the world are recording daily fluctuations in gravitational field strength that would require the underground movement of mountain-sized masses without producing any seismic activity whatsoever. These gravity waves appear and disappear on schedules that follow no known geological or astronomical pattern, suggesting that fundamental forces are being manipulated by processes that exist outside current physics understanding. Gravitational field strength on Earth varies predictably based on factors including altitude, latitude, local geology, and tidal forces from the Moon and Sun. These variations occur gradually over geological timescales or follow predictable astronomical cycles that can be calculated centuries in advance. Modern gravimeters can detect gravitational changes equivalent to the mass of a few kilograms moving underground, making them extraordinarily sensitive instruments for monitoring subsurface geological activity. The anomaly zones produce gravitational fluctuations that register as equivalent to massive underground mass movements happening in real time. Gravimeters record changes suggesting that objects weighing millions of tons are moving back and forth beneath the surface on daily cycles. These mass movements would require enormous geological activity, including fault slippage, underground landslides, or magma chamber displacement that would generate detectable seismic activity. Yet seismometers in the same locations record no unusual earthquake activity whatsoever. Atomic clocks positioned within gravity anomaly zones begin displaying time dilation effects that exceed predictions from Einstein's general relativity. Time moves measurably slower in these locations, with atomic clocks losing synchronization with identical instruments positioned outside the anomaly zones. The time dilation suggests that gravitational field strength is fluctuating far beyond what the measured gravity variations should produce, indicating that space-time itself is being warped by unknown forces. Global Positioning System satellites passing over anomaly zones experience orbital perturbations that require constant course corrections to maintain accurate positioning. The gravitational fluctuations affect satellite trajectories in ways that ground-based measurements cannot fully account for, suggesting that the anomalies extend far above Earth's surface and influence objects at altitudes where terrestrial gravity should remain constant. The geographic distribution of gravity anomaly zones appears to follow underground patterns that don't correspond to any known geological structures. Deep drilling operations in several zones have encountered subsurface conditions that differ dramatically from geological surveys, including rock formations, mineral deposits, and underground water systems that shouldn't exist based on surface geology. These discoveries suggest that the gravitational anomalies may be connected to unknown subsurface structures or processes operating at depths beyond current drilling capabilities. Case 6. The atmospheric river invasion. Massive atmospheric rivers carrying billions of gallons of water vapor are forming spontaneously over the world's driest deserts, thousands of miles from any ocean or significant water source. These moisture superhighways persist for weeks at a time, while transporting water volumes equivalent to major river systems through air that should contain virtually no humidity. The phenomenon violates fundamental principles of atmospheric physics and hydrology, while creating weather patterns that should be physically impossible. Atmospheric rivers represent one of the most important components of global water circulation, typically forming over oceans where evaporation provides the moisture necessary to create these aerial waterways. They transport water vapor from oceanic source regions to continental areas, delivering precipitation that supplies fresh water to billions of people worldwide. The formation process requires vast amounts of surface water, consistent wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions that can sustain moisture transport over thousands of miles. Desert atmospheric rivers emerge from regions that contain no significant water sources and persist in atmospheric conditions that should immediately disperse any moisture content. Satellite imagery shows these phenomena originating from the interior of the Sahara Desert, the Australian outback, and the Atacama Desert, carrying water vapor concentrations equivalent to tropical maritime air masses. The moisture content exceeds what these arid regions could possibly supply through any known evaporation or sublimation process. Isotopic analysis of precipitation from desert atmospheric rivers reveals water chemistry that doesn't match any terrestrial source. The hydrogen and oxygen isotope ratios differ significantly from local groundwater, nearby ocean water, or atmospheric moisture from distant sources. Some precipitation samples contain isotopic signatures that don't correspond to any known water reservoirs on Earth, suggesting either unknown chemical processes or water sources that exist outside conventional hydrological systems. Electrical measurements within desert atmospheric rivers detect electromagnetic activity levels comparable to major thunderstorm systems, despite the absence of typical storm formation processes. Lightning discharges occur within these moisture streams without cloud development, creating electrical phenomena that persist for hundreds of miles along the atmospheric river's path. The electrical activity appears to be integral to the phenomenon rather than incidental, suggesting that electromagnetic forces may be driving moisture transport rather than conventional meteorological processes. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted beneath persistent atmospheric river formation zones have detected massive underground water movement that coincides with aerial moisture transport events. Subsurface water flows appear and disappear in synchronization with atmospheric river activity, suggesting a connection between unknown underground hydrological processes and the impossible aerial moisture transport. These underground flows occur at depths and volumes that exceed any known aquifer systems in these arid regions. Case 7. The Ocean Current Rebellion. The Gulf Stream, one of the most powerful and stable ocean currents on the planet, has begun reversing direction and forming massive counter-rotating eddies that transport warm tropical water against established pressure gradients and temperature differentials. These current reversals extend thousands of feet below the surface into deep ocean layers where surface weather patterns should have no influence whatsoever. The phenomenon threatens to collapse the entire Atlantic circulation system while operating through mechanisms that oceanography cannot explain. The Gulf Stream represents a fundamental component of global ocean circulation, driven by temperature differences, Earth's rotation, and wind patterns that have remained stable for thousands of years. This current transports warm water from the Caribbean northward along the eastern United States coast before crossing the Atlantic to warm European climates. The system moves approximately 30 times more water than all the world's rivers combined, making it one of the most powerful forces in Earth's climate system. Current monitoring buoys throughout the Atlantic now record water movement that directly contradicts established ocean dynamics. Warm water masses are flowing southward against the Gulf Stream's traditional northward direction, creating turbulent mixing zones where temperatures vary by 30 degrees Fahrenheit within a few miles. These reverse currents maintain their flow direction and temperature characteristics for weeks at a time, indicating that they represent genuine current reversals rather than temporary eddies or storms. Deep ocean measurements reveal that the current rebellion extends far below the surface layers, where atmospheric forces could possibly influence water movement. Temperature and salinity sensors positioned at depths exceeding 3,000 feet detect warm water transport moving against pressure gradients that should force cold, dense water downward. This deep ocean activity suggests that unknown forces are driving circulation changes from within the ocean, rather than from surface weather patterns. Marine life throughout the Atlantic has begun exhibiting behavioral changes that indicate fundamental disruption of ocean ecosystems. Fish populations that depend on Gulf Stream transport for migration and feeding have become disoriented, with some species appearing in locations thousands of miles outside their normal ranges. Whale populations show dramatic changes in migration patterns, abandoning routes that their species have followed for millennia and appearing in Arctic regions where water temperatures should be too cold for their survival. The current rebellion appears to be intensifying over time, with reverse flow events becoming more frequent and affecting larger areas of the Atlantic Ocean. Climate monitoring stations throughout Europe report temperature fluctuations that correlate with Gulf Stream disruptions, suggesting that the current rebellion is beginning to affect global weather patterns. Computer models attempting to predict future climate scenarios fail catastrophically when they encounter the current rebellion data, indicating that oceanographic understanding lacks fundamental knowledge about forces that can alter major ocean circulation systems. Case 8. The carbon cycle breakdown. The planet's carbon dioxide levels are fluctuating in patterns that obliterate decades of atmospheric chemistry understanding, with concentrations rising and falling at rates that would require the instantaneous appearance and disappearance of entire ecosystems. These rapid oscillations occur independently of human emissions, seasonal vegetation cycles, or oceanic absorption, suggesting that unknown carbon sources and sinks are operating on scales that dwarf all recognized biogeochemical processes. Carbon dioxide concentrations in Earth's atmosphere have been meticulously tracked for over 60 years through monitoring stations positioned across the globe. The Keeling curve, which documents atmospheric CO2 levels, shows predictable seasonal patterns driven by Northern Hemisphere vegetation cycles and gradual increases related to human fossil fuel consumption. These patterns follow well-understood biological and chemical processes, allowing scientists to predict atmospheric carbon levels with remarkable precision. Current atmospheric monitoring reveals carbon dioxide fluctuations that shatter these established patterns completely. Concentration levels now swing by amounts equivalent to adding or removing billions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere within days or weeks. These massive changes occur without corresponding alterations in industrial emissions, forest fires, volcanic activity, or any other recognized carbon source. The fluctuations exceed what the entire Amazon rainforest could absorb or release if it disappeared and regrew multiple times per year. Isotopic analysis of atmospheric carbon reveals signatures that don't match any known terrestrial carbon reservoirs. Carbon-14 ratios in some air samples suggest carbon sources that have been isolated from atmospheric exchange for thousands of years, while other samples contain carbon isotopes that appear artificially young, as if they were recently synthesized through unknown chemical processes. These isotopic anomalies appear randomly throughout global monitoring networks, indicating that mysterious carbon sources are operating worldwide. Ocean acidification measurements provide equally disturbing evidence of carbon cycle disruption. Marine monitoring stations record dramatic changes in seawater pH levels that correlate with atmospheric carbon fluctuations but exceed what oceanic chemistry should allow. The ocean's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide operates through well-understood chemical equilibrium processes that change gradually over decades. Current measurements show these equilibrium states shifting within hours, suggesting that oceanic carbon absorption is being driven by unknown chemical or biological mechanisms. Vegetation monitoring through satellite imagery reveals plant growth and decay patterns that operate independently of carbon availability or climate conditions. Massive forest regions show accelerated growth during periods when atmospheric carbon levels are falling, contradicting the fundamental principle that plants require carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Other regions display widespread plant die-offs during carbon abundance periods, suggesting that vegetation is responding to environmental factors that current atmospheric science doesn't recognize. Deep ice core analysis from Antarctica and Greenland contains carbon signatures that challenge the entire foundation of paleoclimatology. Ice layers that should represent atmospheric conditions from thousands of years ago contain carbon isotope ratios that match current atmospheric anomalies, suggesting either massive contamination of ancient ice or temporal disruption of carbon cycle processes. These discoveries indicate that the current carbon cycle breakdown may represent a recurring phenomenon that operates on timescales beyond human observation. Case 9. The permafrost paradox. Across the Arctic, permafrost is simultaneously melting and expanding within the same geographical regions, creating thermal conditions that violate fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Temperature measurements reveal soil layers that are freezing while adjacent layers melt, generating temperature inversions that should be physically impossible and producing methane emissions that behave contrary to all known gas diffusion principles. Permafrost represents one of Earth's most stable environmental features, consisting of soil layers that have remained frozen for thousands or millions of years. The formation and maintenance of permafrost depends on consistent below-freezing temperatures that penetrate deep into the ground, creating permanently frozen zones that can extend hundreds of feet below the surface. Climate change research has focused extensively on permafrost thaw, as warming temperatures threaten to release vast amounts of stored carbon and methane into the atmosphere. Current permafrost monitoring reveals thermal behavior that contradicts basic physics principles. Ground temperature sensors positioned at various depths within the same permafrost zone record simultaneous freezing and thawing events that create impossible temperature gradients. Surface layers measuring above freezing temperatures overlay deeper layers that are becoming colder and more solidly frozen, creating thermal inversions that violate heat transfer laws that govern how temperature changes propagate through solid materials. Methane emission patterns from permafrost paradox zones exhibit behavior that defies gas physics and atmospheric chemistry. Methane releases occur in geometric patterns across the landscape, forming perfect circles, straight lines, and grid formations that span miles across tundra regions. Natural methane emissions from thawing permafrost should follow random patterns based on soil composition, temperature variations, and underground gas pockets. The geometric precision of current emissions suggests artificial or unknown natural processes that can control gas release with extraordinary precision. Carbon dating of permafrost samples from paradox zones produces results that violate stratigraphic principles and geological timescales. Soil layers that should represent different historical periods contain organic material with identical carbon-14 dates, suggesting either massive contamination or temporal disruption of natural decay processes. Some deeper layers appear younger than surface layers, contradicting the fundamental principle that older material lies beneath newer deposits in undisturbed geological formations. Microbial analysis of paradox permafrost reveals bacterial communities that thrive in thermal conditions where life should be impossible. These microorganisms display metabolic activity at temperatures where cellular processes should cease completely, suggesting either unknown biological adaptations or environmental conditions that differ dramatically from temperature measurements. The bacterial communities include species that don't match any known Arctic microorganisms, indicating either rapid evolution or introduction from unknown sources. Archaeological investigations in paradox zones have uncovered preserved organic materials that exhibit preservation states inconsistent with their supposed age and burial conditions. Wooden artifacts and plant remains show preservation characteristics that suggest rapid freezing and thawing cycles rather than continuous permafrost conditions, contradicting the definition of permanently frozen soil. These discoveries indicate that permafrost stability in these regions has been disrupted repeatedly through mechanisms that current glaciology cannot explain. Case 10. The seismic pattern revolution. Earthquakes are erupting from geologically stable regions that haven't experienced seismic activity for millions of years, while traditional earthquake zones along major fault lines fall mysteriously silent. The total seismic energy being released worldwide now exceeds what tectonic plate motion can supply, suggesting that unknown forces deep within Earth's interior are fundamentally altering the planet's internal mechanics and stress distribution systems. Earthquake prediction and monitoring relies on understanding tectonic plate boundaries, fault line locations, and stress accumulation patterns that develop over geological timescales. Seismic activity concentrates along plate boundaries where rock masses grind against each other, building up stress that eventually releases through earthquake events. The global distribution of earthquakes has remained relatively consistent throughout recorded history, allowing seismologists to identify high-risk zones and estimate earthquake probabilities based on geological features. Current seismic monitoring stations record earthquake activity in regions that geological surveys classify as completely stable, including areas of Australia, eastern Canada, and Central Africa that haven't experienced significant geological activity for hundreds of millions of years. These new earthquake zones produce seismic signatures that differ from traditional tectonic earthquakes, exhibiting energy patterns that suggest deep crustal fracturing rather than fault-line slippage. Simultaneously, major earthquake zones along the Pacific Ring of Fire, the San Andreas Fault System, and the Himalayan Fault Network have entered periods of unprecedented seismic silence. These regions, which typically generate hundreds of earthquakes annually, now record minimal seismic activity despite continued tectonic plate motion. The absence of earthquakes in high-stress geological zones violates fundamental principles of rock mechanics and stress accumulation, suggesting that tectonic forces are being redirected or absorbed through unknown mechanisms. Global seismic energy calculations reveal total earthquake output that exceeds what current tectonic plate velocities can generate by factors of 3 to 5. Tectonic plates move at measurable speeds ranging from centimeters to inches per year, building up stress at predictable rates based on rock strength and friction coefficients. Current seismic energy release requires stress accumulation rates that would demand tectonic motion several times faster than satellite measurements detect, indicating that additional energy sources are contributing to earthquake generation. Deep earthquake monitoring reveals seismic activity originating from depths that shouldn't be geologically active. Earthquake sources now extend to depths exceeding 400 miles below the surface, far deeper than the brittle rock zones where conventional earthquakes can occur. At these depths, rock should behave plastically under extreme pressure and temperature, making sudden fracturing physically impossible. The deep seismic activity suggests that Earth's internal structure may be reorganizing in ways that current geological models cannot account for. Seismic wave analysis reveals earthquake signatures that don't match any known geological processes. Traditional earthquakes produce characteristic wave patterns based on rock fracturing, fault slippage, or volcanic activity. Current anomalous earthquakes generate waveforms that suggest simultaneous compression and expansion of rock masses, creating seismic signatures that appear to violate basic physics principles governing how solid materials respond to stress. The timing of seismic pattern changes correlates with other global environmental anomalies, suggesting that fundamental planetary systems may be undergoing coordinated reorganization. The earthquake revolution began simultaneously with magnetic field disruptions, atmospheric electrical anomalies, and ocean current reversals, indicating that these phenomena may be manifestations of deeper changes affecting Earth's entire geophysical system. These 10 environmental anomalies represent more than isolated scientific mysteries. They reveal a planet undergoing fundamental changes that challenge our understanding of how Earth's systems operate and interact. From magnetic fields racing across continents to earthquakes erupting from impossible locations, each phenomenon suggests that forces beyond current scientific models are reshaping our world. Whether these changes represent natural cycles we haven't yet recognized or something entirely unprecedented, one thing remains certain. Our planet is transforming in ways that science cannot yet explain or predict.